Hello everyone, Tennessee Tactical back at it again with another YouTube video for you. Today I'm going to be making a complete disassembly and reassembly video for the Taurus 856 revolver. This is kind of, there's two main reasons why I wanted to make this video, or actually three. The first one being I just want to inform people on how to actually disassemble this firearm, reassemble it, and functions test and everything like that. Number two is for the SDI folks who are taking their revolver course in their handgun specialist program. This will be a useful video in helping you disassemble and reassemble this revolver. And number three, this is just for people who also already own a Taurus 856 or plan on buying one. And this is just a good video to help you kind of learn how to disassemble and reassemble this. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. We're going to first clear the firearm and make sure that it's clear before we start taking it apart. Cylinders are absolutely clear, nothing in the chamber or barrel there. So we're completely clear and safe to go ahead and start disassembling. So tools for disassembly, what are you going to need? So first thing is you're going to need some sort of bench block. This is actually not needed, but I will say that this is going to make it super simple, a lot more easier. So I would definitely say get a bench block. This is just a universal bench block from Real Avid. So there's that. You're going to need some like a driver and some bits, especially like gunsmithing screwdrivers. You can use these sort of screwdrivers. This is a gunsmithing hollow ground flathead. Make sure you're using the right kind of drivers though. Don't use regular flatheads. Use the gunsmithing bits, the hollow ground bits. You don't have to use like a driver like I'm using. You can have used those, the wood handles, or something like that. But I'm choosing to use my Real Avid set here. If I can get this thing open, there we go. So I'm choosing to use this. This is my Real Avid set that I made a video on. You can check that out. I'll link that down in the description below. So you're going to need some different bits here. And I'll go into what size that is because we haven't started messing with it yet. But you're definitely going to need some bits here. You're going to need a hammer, particularly one with a brass face and then kind of like a polymer or plastic face or rubber. That'll work too. Just make sure that you have a decent gunsmithing hammer. You're also going to need a punch to take out the grip roll pin. You're going to need specifically a 1/8 inch punch. So you're going to need one of those too, roll pin punch. And then I will explain why you're going to need something like this here in a little bit. But you're going to need, this is probably more readily available to people, but you're probably going to need some paper clips. So get some paper clips or something really, really thin that you can jab through a tiny hole. And I will explain why you're going to need those later. So those are basically the tools that you're going to need. Another tool that you might need is like a magnetic part tray like this. I've got some attached to my gunsmithing bit set here, so I'm going to kind of use that. So those are the tools that you're going to be needing. So the first thing you want to do when you're working on any kind of gun is making sure you are organized, okay? So don't have parts laying around everywhere. So again, we've already cleared the firearm and we are ready to start our disassembly. So first thing we need to do is actually take the roll pin out. So we're going to take it out this way first, and then we're going to put it, or I'm sorry, we're going to take it out this way first and then put it back in this way. That's just one of those old gunsmithing things, but I don't really understand the reason behind that, but we'll just do it like this. So again, roll pin, 1/8 inch roll pin, and then we're going to kind of move the gun around in a way that we can kind of get it resting. And then we're going to tap that with a hammer. Use your brass side. You don't have to be overly aggressive. It'll walk itself out, but sometimes you might have to readjust your grip, kind of like I'm going to have to right here. And then I can feel that it's walking out, and there it is. Sometimes it'll just fall down. This does have a magnetic kind of thing into it to where it won't kind of go anywhere. So now you've got your roll pin out of your revolver, and you can set that aside. Again, want to make sure that we are being organized, so I'll kind of set that right there. You take your roll pin out, or your punch out, and then now, since you have no roll pin in there, you can now take the grip out. You just want to kind of pull it out, and then there you go. So your grip, we can lay that to the side, and now we need to get to the side plate. So now we've got to take the side plate off, and there are 3 screws holding the side plate in place. We've got 2 small ones, and then you've got a screw here, but behind that, you've got a detent or a plunger and a spring that's actually holding your yoke in place. So you want to make sure that you're doing that properly and stuff. So now we're going to take our drivers, and then we can, and you can use all sorts, you could use any size. This one has a light on it, so, this is more illuminated, but I'm going to use this small driver here. So now we can start taking off these side plate screws. I've kind of boogered up this one over here. I plan on replacing it. I boogered that up during a torture test, and I had tried to get some gunk out of it, and it actually stripped the screw because I was in the field, well, at the range, and I did not have the correct gunsmithing screwdriver. So again, I am a witness to this. Use the correct tool for the correct job. So I've got those 2 screws out now. You can switch your bits out or whatever you have. Now we can take this side plate screw off. Now this one can kind of be a little tricky here. Sometimes it doesn't want to come out all the way. Sometimes I've found that if you push the thumb piece in and pull the cylinder out, it will actually come out. So now you've got your screw here, and then your plunger and detent, or your detent and spring, whatever you want to call that thing. So just make sure that does not get lost, and the little parts to that screw doesn't get lost. So set those in a very secure location. And then now, since I did that, I can actually pull the cylinder out. So we'll do that just like this. So initially it was in here like that, and then I just went like that, and then I'm going to pull it out. Sometimes it kind of gets a little stuck. So now we've got the cylinder out of the way. You don't want to mess with this. I mean, we could disassemble this, but there's really no point. So we can set that to the side. And then now we need to take the side plate off. Now, if you watched my side plate video or the gunsmithing tip video, I showed you how to do that. We're going to do this again. So the correct method to take a side plate off, you want to take a handle of some type of hammer or something and strike it right here on the grip surface, or where the grip's going to go, and you'll start to see that side plate walk off. So now the side plate is off. Now we can set that to the side, and now we've got our inner workings of the revolver. And as you can see, there's a lot of parts here. So this is where it kind of gets a little bit more complicated for those who haven't done this before. So you really got to pay attention here. So now the next thing we're going to take out here is our hammer strut and spring. So there is a right way to do this. So you can't fully cock the hammer back at this part of disassembly. So the way to do this is you're going to take your thumb piece and you're going to push it back so you can actually have the hammer in fully cocked position. So once you do that, you'll see this little hole right here in the hammer strut. And what you want to do, and this is why I said to take a paper clip, you want to take a paper clip, and you really, I mean, all you need to do is take the paper clip and kind of stick it through, and I bend it ever so slightly so it doesn't walk back off. There's a big reason why you want to keep that recessed in there and retained. So now we can let the hammer down. Once we've let the hammer down, you'll see that this hammer strut and spring actually gives way. So now we can take that out, and we don't want to really disassemble this. I mean, we can. Literally, if you pull that paper clip out, that spring's going to go flying under spring tension. And then this little retainer piece right here, that's going to also retain your spring on your strut, but it's also going to rest right here on the frame. So again, you don't really want to disassemble this. You can if you want to. Like I said, you just take the paper clip out and it's going to go flying, but there's really no need to. So we can set that to the side here. So now the next thing we're going to do is disassemble our trigger spring assembly. And the way to do this is kind of how we did it here. So you're going to look for the hole, and how you do this is just like you did last time. You're going to pull back on the thumb piece and then pull back on the hammer and have it in the cocked position. And then when you do that, I hope you can see that. There is a hole in there, and you want to take a paper clip, and just like you did before, you want to stick the paper clip, and this is a pretty big paper clip, so I'm going to have to kind of bend it down here. You can fit them to size. So now, once you've got your paper clip kind of in that hole there, recessing and retaining that spring, you can now let the hammer down by holding the thumb piece, because you don't really have, you can pull the trigger, you could do that, or you can pull back on the thumb piece, kind of like how I did. So now that trigger spring assembly is not attached to the trigger, and now you can actually walk that off. And sometimes it can be kind of hard to get that to come out, so you just wiggle it. Again, make sure your paper clip doesn't come off, because if that comes off, then that's going to go flying under spring tension. So there's really no need to disassemble this as well, but all you do again is pull out on your paper clip. So we can set that to the side. So now we can move on to our next part of the disassembly, which is going to be the hammer. So in order to disassemble the hammer, we're going to have to cock it back ever so slightly so it clears a few different surfaces, and then we can kind of cock it back some more. Again, you're going to want to manipulate this thumb piece here. So with my finger on the other side, you can manipulate that thumb piece, because you're not going to be able to cock it all the way back. So pull that thumb piece back, and what you're going to do is you're going to pull back just enough to where the entire hammer clears, or this part of the hammer, which is right here. If I get good demonstration, you want to clear that of the sear surface, and the hand right here too as well. So see, this is where you want to be, right here. You want to clear the hand and the sear surface and everything like that. So or you want the sear surface to clear the hand. So now we can walk that off, and now there is our hammer. We've got our double action sear on that. We won't disassemble that. So and now we can move on to other parts. So if you wanted to disassemble and take the double action sear out, you'll notice that there's a pin right here. You'll take that pin off, and again, there's a spring there, and it's under spring tension. So you want to make sure you're capturing your springs so they don't go flying. So we won't do that just for simple purposes, but this is, the hammer and the double action sear. So now that you have taken your hammer off, another thing that you can go ahead and do as of this moment, and I would argue that this should be done as soon as you take your hammer off, so you can get in that area, is going to be your firing pin and firing pin retaining pin, as well as the firing pin spring that's inside that, and I'll show you in just a second. So you're going to be working in this area right up here. So in order to do that, we're going to have to grab some pliers. That is another tool that you're going to need. I did not mention that, but you're going to need some needle nose pliers. And be careful when you do this. You don't want to mar up the surface of things. But you see that retaining pin right there? You just want to take some needle nose pliers, gently pull that pin out. Once you've done that, you can again set that to the side so you're not losing stuff. And then you have now made way for your firing pin to come out. You can take like a screwdriver, but be very careful not to damage the surfaces. And you'll notice, if you can see, there's a little lip right here on the firing pin where it is retained by the pin. You can actually just kind of pull that firing pin out, and then you can grab that. On the firing pin, you're going to have a firing pin spring. You don't want to lose that. So make sure that these parts are, again, like all parts, organized so you don't lose them. So now the next step of the disassembly process is going to be with the hand. So the hand is a little tricky to disassemble, but with a little bit of finesse, we can do it. So you want to, and you can see here, this is good information for people. You know, you can kind of, once you disassemble stuff, you can kind of see how it's engineered and how everything works. This hand is powered by a plunger and a spring, and it's on spring tension. So every time I pull it back, if I let go, it's going to jettison back into its home, where you can see that hand right there protrude out of the frame leading onto the cylinder. So what you want to do is pull back on the hand, take your finger or something, and because again there's a plunger and a spring, you don't want it to go flying, so pull back on the hand, and then you just want to kind of walk it off, but you're gonna have to clear the surface of the frame where the tip of the hand goes through the frame. And again, this is kind of weird to show on camera, but this is how you do it. So you just want to kind of walk that off. Something to kind of help you if this isn't working is you can take something like this, but you have to be very careful. Again, you don't want to mess up any of the surfaces. You can take a screwdriver and just kind of aid you in that by pulling up, and I can kind of feel that give way. And now, once I've got it, again, be careful of the plunger. That almost scared me there. So here's your hand, and again, it's kind of hard to show on camera, but like I said, there's a spring there and there's a plunger, and it's very kind of in a weird orientation there. You have to use some finesse. So there's the hand. So now we can set the hand down. Now my plunger is laying right here. Kind of use my pliers to pick that up. So now we can set the plunger down, and the spring, I'm pretty sure, is still inside the trigger. So now my spring is falling out of the trigger. Again, you don't want to lose these. I thought maybe I had lost it, but it's still here. So now we've got that. And now we can move on to the next part of the disassembly process. So now the next part of the disassembly process, we can take off our trigger, and when you take off the trigger, the transfer bar will actually come loose as well. So this again just requires some finesse, like most of these parts do. What I like to do is hold down on the trigger bar here. So just kind of use your finger and hold down the trigger bar, and then take your trigger and just kind of wiggle it until that will pop off. And again, you might want to use some finesse, but you can get that to wiggle off there. Once you've got your trigger wiggled off, you can see that walking off now. So now your trigger, you can set down, and your transfer bar is just kind of laying there in the frame, because the only way that it is connected is by the trigger. So it's connected into this tiny hole here, just like that. So, and it lays like that. So you want to put those parts to the side. Now we can move on to the next step. So now we can take our cylinder stop out, and on some models you're going to have a spring attached to that, but on this model there is no spring, so I can't really adhere to those at the moment. But for the ones that don't have a spring, again, more finesse. It's just going to require some finesse. So you can see it's really just kind of placed in there very peculiarly, if that's even a word. So sort of you can take something and kind of try to pry it out, but I'm always against prying on things, especially gun parts. But so if you're going to do that, be very careful. I've always found just kind of giving it a good shake, sometimes it will fall out just like that. Again, if you want to take like maybe some pliers to take it out. Now I will say that usually I try to use pliers to seat it back in, but to disassemble it or to take it out, it's really not necessary. So you can set your cylinder stop to the side, and now we can move on to the next step. So now we can take our thumb piece out, and there's going to be a plunger of the sorts, as well as a spring kind of holding that in place. So how to take this out, you want to take a bit or hollow ground flathead, just loosen that up, and then that will come loose. So you can take your thumb piece out, and then you've got your thumb piece screw. I just kind of leave that in there. You don't have to take that out. And then now you will see on the back, we still have that part that it's recessed into is still in position by the spring. So a good way to do this, I just like to hold the spring back so it doesn't go flying. And I'll take something, even my thumb or my finger, you can see how I'm kind of moving it. I can take some pliers and be very careful so you don't mess up any surfaces. But while holding down on that, you can kind of walk that back and out. And you can see that spring, it's about a jettison. So again, be careful. You can also take the spring off itself by a pair of pliers, but I would argue against that. You don't want to mess the spring up, so I would argue against that. Basically, you just got to kind of finesse it until eventually it will come out. So the way that I just did it is I took my screwdriver and kind of pulled back enough until that little point right here came out of the frame, and then the spring had nowhere to go because I was holding it down. So the spring is captured, as well as this piece right here, and you want to lay that down. So once you took that out, this is the complete disassembly. There is nothing to further disassemble. You have now completed your complete disassembly on the Taurus 856. So now we can reverse order everything and now reassemble. So the first thing we can do is take our thumb piece little part here. We want to put it back into position. As you can see, that hole right there goes into this hole. So we will put that back down in there, and then you got your spring. The spring sits on that little nipple right there. So you want to take your spring, and what I like to do is just use my finger and just kind of push it down in there. And that's a pretty easy spring to do. Some of those are hard, but that one's pretty easy. So now we can put the thumb piece itself back on. We can take our thumb piece screw and the thumb piece, set it back in the correct orientation. You want to make sure that you're lined up on the other side too, and we are. So now I can take my driver and tighten that back up. You don't want to over torque it, but you want to get it tight enough to where it's going to stay on there. Function test that, make sure that's working, make sure the spring's captured, so we're good to go. Now we can put our cylinder stop back in. So we can take our cylinder stop, and this is where I said sometimes you might have to use a little bit of finesse. Just kind of throw it in there. That little hook's got to go over that little pin there sticking out, and that little curve goes into that pin. And the way that I like to make sure that it is in its place is kind of use something and kind of push up on it. And once you see that cylinder stop protruding into the frame where it's going to stop the cylinder grooves, you'll know that you have it in place. So now we can move on to the next step. So now the next step is going to be putting the trigger back in place, as well as the transfer bar. You have to do this at the same time because the transfer bar has to go in and fit behind the trigger. So this is going to be a little difficult, but again, finesse. The transfer bar is going to have a little nipple here on it, and then up on the left of the trigger, you're going to have a small hole. The bigger hole is for the integrated kind of nipple here, or whatever you want to call that. But that's what your trigger fits into, and then the transfer bar is going to fit on this small hole here. So again, you have to put these in at the same time. It requires a little bit of finesse. So just kind of set your transfer bar right here. Take your trigger. Go ahead and put your trigger, get it started seating in that correct hole. And then take your transfer bar and kind of line that up with the hole in on the trigger. And then you can kind of start pushing down and mating all that together. And again, requires finesse, but you can see that now my transfer bar is connected to the trigger is connected to the point on the frame, and now it's all functioning. So now we can move on to the next part. So now the next thing we can put back in its place is the firing pin spring, and the retaining pin for the firing pin. So we have to put the spring and the firing pin in first. So I will go ahead and do that. Get my little retaining pin. Where's it going? There it is. So now you see this little cutout here. That has to be facing just like this. It faces like that so the retaining pin can fit in right here. So again, take your firing pin. It goes in that big hole right there. And for those who can't see that, it goes right in there. So you're going to take your firing pin with the spring on it and literally just drop it down in there. So once you put that in, now you want to kind of push on the firing pin so that little trench that's cut out into the firing pin can be a way for the retaining pin to fit in. So you just want to take, and it might not be useful to use your fingers. You might want to use some pliers. Again, don't death grip it. You'll definitely tear up the surface. But just take that, push that in, and then kind of seat that in its place there. And again, all these parts require finesse. Don't get, mad if you can't get something the first time. See how I just did not get it the first time. This requires patience. Gunsmithing is very, very patient oriented and driven. So make sure that you're being patient when you're working with this. So now you see how I have that in there. Now I can push that down. Firing pin is retained. We can assess that by shaking downward to make sure that the firing pin won't fall out. You don't want to deliberately shake this way because that retaining pin will fall out. It's kind of a weird design. It's really not set in there the best. But now you've got that in, and now we can go to the next part. So now we can assemble the hand and the plunger and the spring for the hand. Now again, this is driven by spring pressure. So, this bottom leg here is going, the plunger is going to rest on the bottom leg, and it's going to power that hand. Spring's going to depress there in the trigger, in the bottom of the trigger there, and then what's going to happen is, that force is going to push on the hand and move it. So you want to make sure you're taking care of that when you're putting that in, so you don't jettison a spring out. It's very important when you're working on stuff like that. So one error that you can make when you're installing your hand is you see these two these little these poles here. The longer one is what is going to sit against the trigger, and like I said, is what is going to be rested on or acted upon by the plunger here. The smaller hole, or the smaller pole here, is what is going to fit down in this small hole right there on the trigger. So it's actually the same hole that the transfer bar sets in. So you want to put your spring and plunger down in this little section right in here. You probably can't see that too well, and I apologize, but there's a little hole up here that you're going to want to fit your spring and plunger into. So push your hammer back and then kind of let that sit down in there. And now you want to take your hand, and again, you want to make sure you're covering that as you're putting it in so the spring doesn't jettison out. So the small pole goes down in the hole. And again, this all requires finesse. You can use the hand itself to kind of push that plunger in, because you're going to have to push the plunger in to get enough clearance to get that on top of the trigger there where the hole is. So I'm going to try to do this without fail. But generally, this requires a few different tries. Again, patience is key here. So it took me quite a few tries, and it'll probably take you quite a few tries, but you'll know once you get it in there. Just kind of push the hand, that little pole on the hand, against the plunger so it can depress itself into the trigger enough to where you can get that small pole seated upon the trigger there. And you'll know once you have it in, because the spring won't fly out, and you'll notice that you can make sure that your hand is under spring tension and working properly. One thing I would like to mention, like I said earlier, when you're working on these parts, it can be very, difficult. It can be frustrating. Patience is key. So you never want to be frustrated as a gunsmith. So and learning patience is very important. So if you're ever working on something and you start to get frustrated, now's the time to take a break, step away from the table or the workbench and grab a snack, get some fresh air and clear your head for a minute, and then come back and reassess. Because the more we get frustrated, the more impatient we become, and then the harder it's going to be, and our performance and work is going to be a lot less efficient than it would be if we were more patient, calm, collective, and focused. So before we can assemble more, one thing I'd like to mention here is you can actually do a functions test here on this assembly with your transfer bar, your hand, and your trigger. So you can pull that thumb piece back and you can pull your trigger and make sure that your trigger is working appropriately, as well as your transfer bar and hand, that they're all moving up and down by the trigger movement, and that your hand is actually coming out of the frame there where your cylinder is going to reside. That means that your workings, your inner workings right now are working properly, as well as your little cylinder stop here too, because you can see it's going to move up and down with each pull of the trigger there. So we can confirm that all the parts that we've put in are working to order as of now. So now we can move on to the next step. So now you can assemble your hammer. So grab your hammer, and you want to kind of move these parts in the orientation to where if the hammer were in there, it would be slightly cocked. So you can see that kind of crow there, the crow foot there of the hammer, or of the trigger, I mean. You can see that that little hook is kind of moving in and out as I pull the trigger. So again, that little pole there, it's going to connect there to your trigger. You want to go ahead and start seating that in, because you want to be able to see how it's going to be able to fit in. So move that thumb piece back, start moving your parts, and you can see, and you might have to take your hammer back out, but you want to make sure there's enough clearance. So you can just drop your hammer in there and make sure that you have enough clearance. So I've almost got this set in, and it actually is set in, but just know that when you go to set it in, your hammer is going to kind of be in this position. Make sure that when you're pulling all these parts back, your transfer bar, your hand, your trigger, make sure that they're in an orientation to where you're going to have enough clearance. So if I can move that hammer back out, and I can show you that there was enough clearance there to put the hammer in. So again, pull the thumb piece back. You can see that actuating. Pull your trigger, put your hammer down here. You want to make sure that you're mating up all the correct surfaces, and you can see that the hand is actually working as well. It's grabbing onto that edge of the trigger there. And if we cock the hammer, you can see that it actually goes into a fully cocked position. So we can test that and make sure that all those parts are working and that the sear surface is engaging as well. So again, the functions test that you can do with the hammer on there is to pull that thumb piece back, or the bolt that's connected to the thumb piece, and then pull that hammer back, and you can see that all the surfaces are working as normal. That hammer is moving back freely. The reason why you want to press or pull the thumb piece back is because you're basically acting as if the cylinder is in the firearm, which it is not right now. But that's how you do a test on that. Pull that back, and you can hear it going into full cock. And then now you won't be able to pull the trigger because your trigger spring's not in there. But you can at least check to see that all of your sear surfaces, your hand, your transfer bar, trigger, double action sear, your hammer, all that is working as it should. So now we can move on to the next part. So now we can install our trigger spring assembly, or our trigger bar assembly with the spring. And remember how I told you there is a little notch here, a little pole there. You You want to match that up with this hole right here, not the big one, but the small one. So with your paper clip intact so you don't lose the spring, you want to get that seated in there. But now you want to find the sweet spot. And I'm going to take this back out to show you. There's a sweet spot on the trigger where the edge or the tip of that bar is going to be resting against to retain it. You can see that. The indention, if you can see, there's a little indention. Maybe I can use this to lighten this up. There's a little indention in there, and that indention is where this ball, the tip of the ball there, is going to be resting against. So again, you might have to use some finesse. That is what you're supposed to do there. So now I can put everything back in its orientation, take my trigger bar, kind of fit it in without taking the paper clip out. Now I can pull the thumb piece and the bolt back to where hopefully that is going to catch. And if it doesn't, one thing you can do is kind of use something to kind of maybe push that into its place while you pull that back. Sometimes it takes a few tries there. So you might actually have to move your trigger bar while it's inside of the frame. Sometimes you've got to find the orientation, so you might have to take it back out and put it back in. This is kind of one of those parts that can start to frustrate you. Again, if it does, just take a step back. So now hopefully we've got this time, so you can pull back here, and now I heard something give way. So now I think I've got it in place now. At this point you want to remove your paper clip, and then you can see that that spring is captured down in there by that ball, that it's in its resting spot right here. Again, that was pretty hard to show on camera, so I apologize if that wasn't the best. So now we can kind of functions test that to make sure that that is working correctly, and you can see that the spring is depressing under the tension and that everything is in its correct order. So now we can move on to the next part. So as another functions test as you go, like I kind of demonstrated, you can see that if you pull that bolt back again because the cylinder's not in there, we can do sort of a functions test here. We can assess the single action, that everything is cocking and the transfer bar is moving, the hand's moving, the trigger bar and spring is depressing. But now we can pull that bolt back, and since we've got the double action sear in there with the hammer and the trigger spring, we can actually kind of functions test the double action there. So we can pull back on that thumb piece, pull the trigger, and the only reason why the trigger's not springing forward is because the mainspring, or the trigger spring and strut, is not in the firearm yet. To let the hammer go back and strike the firing pin. But we can assess that it looks like under the impression of pulling the bolt back, you can see that the double action sear, the trigger spring, the hand, and the transfer bar is all working as it should. It's cocking and doing what it should be doing. So there is that. So now we can move on to the next part, which is our trigger, or our hammer, strut, and spring. So now we can put this back in. And the way to do this is, again, pull the bolt back. You want to pull your hammer back like that. But first, you want to kind of set it in place. So there's going to be these shelves on the frame here. You want to match that up. And when the strut is sitting in, it needs to be sitting in like this, not like that. It needs to be sitting in like this. So you can take the strut, put it in its correct orientation where it's sitting on those shelves. If I don't move it again, so you can kind of see there how it's setting in its shelf there. So you want to hold the strut, pull the bolt back, pull the hammer back until that spring tension gives way there and kind of captures that. You could have started to see that, but I kind of let go of that. So again, we'll try that again. So again, you know, we can take our strut, kind of wiggle it and maneuver it until we can kind of line it up. Now, one thing I didn't show is that on the hammer, there's a little indentation right here. Maybe this light will show you. There's a little indentation right there on the hammer, and that is where the tip of your strut is going to be mating up against. You can kind of see it right there. So the shelf on this is going to sit right there if I don't drop it and lose it. And then your strut, or the tip of your strut, is going to fit into the hammer. So we can try that again there. Just wanted to show you a better example of how it's going to fit in. So the hammer should capture that under spring tension, and once it does, you will hear it click, and then you will know that that is captured, that strut and spring, and you can kind of see your paper clip trying to fall out. And you can just let it go, and then pull the bolt back and pull the hammer forward, and you can see that that is working. So now we can do another functions test, and now we can pull back on the bolt and assess the trigger bar and spring, as well as the hammer, spring, and strut. We can see that it's in the fully cocked position. We can pull the trigger. We can now assess that the trigger's working, and we can try it in double action as well. So we can pull the thumb piece back and start to pull that trigger. We can see that the double action mode is working as well as the single action. So now we've got all those parts working, and now we're almost done. We've got to put our side plate back in. So you just want to fit it back in kind of the orientation it's supposed to go in. So now we can tap the side plate with the handle of our hammer to fit it into place. So you just kind of lightly tap until you see it. Kind of fit into its place as it is now. So now that you've got your side plate fitted down in, before we put these screws down and tighten it down, you want to go ahead and put your cylinder in the firearm. There's a reason behind this, is because when you put your screw in right here for that holds the yoke in place, you know, with that plunger and the spring, you will see that there's actually a hole right here that it can actually fall out of when you're tapping on the firearm, when you're putting in your, you know, whatever else you're doing. So it's good rule of thumb that you put in your cylinder first, and you will do that by taking your cylinder, lining it up with that hole right here, just pushing it in, make sure it's pushed all the way in, and then it shall fit back into place. At this moment, we can do a functions test, but I want to go ahead and put those screws in and tighten that down as for this video. Now, if I was a gunsmith working on this firearm as of right now for a customer, I'd probably leave those screws off, just so if something didn't feel right, I wouldn't have to take those back out to take the side plate off. But because I know as a gunsmith that this firearm is functioning perfectly, we're going to go ahead and put those screws back in. So now we can take this plunger and spring, put that down in that. That little tip needs to be sticking out. So the spring needs to be facing down. So now we can put that screw in there. And then we can take our bit here, put it in the screwdriver and tighten it up. And then we can move on to the other two screws. Again, you don't want to overly tighten these. You might strip it if you do. Just be very careful that you don't mess anything up. Just tighten it, hand tighten is best. Then we can take our other screws and tighten up the rest of the side plate screws. So now once you've got your side plate screws on and tightened down, you can now do a functions test on the firearm. You can do this now, or you can wait till you put your grip back on. Either way is going to work because you're not messing with any more functionality of the firearm. So just for the sake of this video, I will go ahead and do that after I have installed the grip. So in order to install a grip, you just take it, push it down into its place. Then we're going to get our bench block back. And since I took it out, I believe it was this way, we can put it in this way. Take your roll pin punch, your hammer, and then get that seated in. You want to make sure that it's flush. So now we have about even space on each side, and now we have a complete firearm again, reassembled, and now we can do a functions test to make sure this firearm is functioning as it should. So we can, again, we are clear. We can do a single action test. Hammer cocks back, cylinder moves, hands working. I can feel that the transfer bar is moving. And you can visually inspect the transfer bar right here, see that it's moving up. And then in double action, we can see that that is working as well. And yes, it's okay to dry fire this. And then the cylinder is working. It's coming out like it's supposed to with the thumb piece. So now we can assume that this firearm is completely free of any kind of maintenance errors, and that it's working fine and it's in good working orders. So after you have done a functions test on, after completed reassembly, you've determined that the firearm is in working order, and now you have a complete firearm at your hands. And now you have completed the full disassembly and full reassembly of this Taurus 856. If you have any questions, any kind of issues, if you're having troubles with anything, leave it down in the comments below, and I'll try to help you out as best as I can. But I think that will do it for this long video. Hopefully you've stayed with me through the entire thing. Hopefully this was of use to you. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.